Sarah Martinez thought her dream was over when Commander Harrison kicked her out of pilot training, calling her just another diversity hire. 5 years later, she returned to the same base, not as a failed recruit, but as the pilot of an F-22 Raptor, ready to show them what real flying looked like. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more HOA stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training camp as Sarah Martinez stepped out of her beat-up Honda Civic. Her hands shook slightly as she grabbed her small duffel bag from the back seat. Today was the day she had dreamed about since she was 8 years old, watching fighter jets soar overhead at the county air show. But her dream was about to become a nightmare. "You must be the new recruit," sneered Commander Blake Harrison, a tall man with cold gray eyes and a permanent scowl. He looked Sarah up and down like she was something unpleasant he'd stepped in. "Let me guess. Another diversity hire?" Sarah's stomach dropped. She had worked 3 jobs to save money for this elite pilot training program. She had studied every manual, practiced every simulation, and scored higher than 90% of applicants on the entrance exam. But all Commander Harrison saw was a short, quiet woman from a small town. "Sir, I'm Sarah Martinez. I scored 98% on the entrance exam and have 500 hours of flight time," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Harrison laughed, a harsh sound that made other recruits turn and stare. "Flight time in what? A crop duster? This is real pilot training, sweetheart. Not a weekend hobby." The other recruits snickered. Most of them were men from military families with expensive flight training and connections. They wore their confidence like armor, while Sarah felt exposed and small. "Listen up, Martinez," Harrison continued, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This program is for future fighter pilots. We don't have time to babysit someone who clearly doesn't belong here." Sarah's face burned with embarrassment, but she stood her ground. "Give me a chance, sir. I know I can do this." "A chance?" Harrison's eyebrows shot up. "Fine. You want a chance? Let's see what you've got." He led her to the flight simulator, an advanced machine that cost more than most people's houses. The other recruits gathered around, whispering and placing bets on how quickly she would crash. "This is a combat scenario," Harrison explained, his voice dripping with false patience. "You're flying an F-16 against enemy aircraft. Think you can handle it?" Sarah nodded and climbed into the simulator. Her heart pounded as she strapped herself in, but her hands were steady on the controls. She had practiced scenarios like this thousands of times on her computer at home. The simulation began. Enemy aircraft appeared on her screen, moving fast and aggressive. Sarah took a deep breath and began to fly. What happened next shocked everyone. Sarah didn't just survive the simulation. She dominated it. Her movements were precise, her tactics brilliant. She shot down 6 enemy aircraft without taking a single hit. The simulator scored her performance as exceptional, the highest rating possible. The room fell silent. The other recruits stared at the screen in disbelief. But instead of congratulating her, Harrison's face darkened with anger. "Lucky shot," he muttered. "Let's see you do that again." He reset the simulation, this time on the hardest difficulty level. Sarah flew again and again. She excelled. Her score was even higher than before. Harrison's jaw clenched. He couldn't accept that this quiet woman had outperformed everyone in his program. "The simulator must be malfunctioning," he announced. "We'll test the real thing tomorrow." That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk, listening to the other recruits whisper about her. Some were impressed, but others were resentful. She had upset the natural order of things and they didn't like it. The next morning brought the real flight test. Sarah was assigned an old training aircraft that had seen better days. As she walked toward the plane, she noticed several mechanics working on it. "Having some trouble with that one," one of them said to Harrison, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Engine's been acting up all week." Harrison smiled coldly. "I'm sure she can handle it. Can't you, Martinez?" Sarah knew what was happening. They were setting her up to fail, maybe even to get hurt. But she also knew she couldn't back down now. If she quit, she would never get another chance like this. She climbed into the cockpit and started the engine. It sputtered and coughed but finally caught. The plane shook as she taxied to the runway. "Flight control, this is Training 7 requesting permission for takeoff," she radioed. "Training 7, you are cleared for takeoff. Good luck, Martinez." The plane lurched forward, slower than it should have. Sarah could feel the engine struggling, but she managed to get airborne. The flight test required her to perform a series of maneuvers, including tight turns, loops, and a simulated landing approach. With the faulty engine, every maneuver was dangerous. The plane wanted to stall, to spin out of control. But Sarah fought it every step of the way. She used every trick she had learned, every hour of practice to keep the aircraft flying. She completed the test and landed safely, but her hands were shaking from the effort. Harrison was waiting for her on the tarmac, his face red with rage. That was sloppy flying, Martinez. Completely unacceptable. Sir, the engine was malfunctioning. I did the best I could under the circumstances. Excuses? Harrison shouted. A real pilot doesn't make excuses. A real pilot gets the job done no matter what. The other recruits had gathered around, watching the confrontation. Sarah could see some of them nodding in agreement with Harrison, while others looked uncomfortable. I want you off this base by noon, Harrison continued. You're dismissed from the program. You don't have what it takes to be a fighter pilot. Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. All her dreams, all her hard work, gone in an instant. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of these people. This isn't fair, she said quietly. Life isn't fair, sweetheart, Harrison replied with a cruel smile. The sooner you learn that, the better. Sarah packed her things in silence. The other recruits avoided her eyes as she walked past them to her car. She had never felt so alone in her life. As she drove away from the base, Sarah made a promise to herself. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next 5 years were the hardest of Sarah's life. She worked multiple jobs to pay her bills while continuing her flight training on her own. She flew cargo planes, crop dusters, even gave flying lessons to rich kids whose parents wanted them to have an authentic experience. But every spare moment, every dollar she could save went toward one goal: becoming the best pilot she could possibly be. She studied advanced aerodynamics, combat tactics, and military strategy. She practiced in simulators until her scores were perfect. She pushed herself harder than any instructor ever had, because she knew that when her chance came, she would have to be flawless. During those 5 years, Sarah learned something important about Commander Harrison. He wasn't just a training instructor, he was also a pilot who flew demonstration flights for the military. He traveled to air shows around the country showing off in his F-22 Raptor, the most advanced fighter jet in the world. Harrison had become something of a celebrity in military circles. He was featured in magazines, interviewed on TV shows, and treated like a hero wherever he went. His arrogance had only grown with his fame. But Sarah also learned that Harrison had a secret. His flying skills weren't nearly as good as his reputation suggested. He had been involved in several incidents, near crashes and mistakes that had been covered up by his connections in the military. He was a mediocre pilot who had risen to prominence through politics and self-promotion. Sarah's opportunity came when she least expected it. She was working as a flight instructor at a small airport when she received a call from General Patricia Wong, one of the few female generals in the Air Force. Ms. Martinez, I've been following your career, General Wong said. I remember your test scores from the training program 5 years ago. I also remember how you were treated. Sarah's heart began to race. Yes, ma'am. We have a situation. Our top pilot for the upcoming International Air Show has been injured. We need someone who can fly an F-22 in a demonstration flight. Someone who can handle the pressure and represent our country well. Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. You want me to fly an F-22? I want you to prove that the military made a mistake 5 years ago. Are you interested? Sarah didn't hesitate. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. The training was intense. Sarah had only 2 weeks to learn the F-22 systems and practice the demonstration routine. The F-22 was unlike anything she had ever flown. It was faster, more powerful, and more complex than any aircraft in the world. But Sarah had been preparing for this moment for 5 years. She absorbed every detail, mastered every system, and practiced until the routine was second nature. The air show was being held at the same base where Sarah had been kicked out of pilot training. Commander Harrison was scheduled to fly the opening demonstration in his F-22, followed by Sarah in the main event. Sarah arrived at the base the day before the show. She kept her head down and stayed out of sight, not wanting to attract attention before her big moment. But Harrison spotted her anyway. Well, he said, approaching her with his usual arrogant smile. If it isn't Sarah Martinez. What are you doing here? Serving coffee to the real pilots? Sarah looked up at him calmly. I'm flying tomorrow, Commander. Harrison's smile faltered. Flying what? A cargo plane? An F-22. The main demonstration flight. The color drained from Harrison's face. That's impossible. You're not qualified to fly an F-22. Actually, I am. I've been certified for 2 weeks now, Harrison's hands clenched into fists. This is a joke. You couldn't even handle a training aircraft. Now they're letting you fly our most advanced fighter? I guess we'll see tomorrow, Sarah said quietly, then walked away. The day of the air show dawned clear and bright. Thousands of people had gathered to watch the demonstrations, including military officials, politicians, and aviation enthusiasts from around the world. Harrison flew first as scheduled. His routine was competent but unremarkable. He performed the basic maneuvers required for an air show demonstration, nothing more. The crowd applauded politely, but there was no excitement, no sense that they had witnessed something special. After Harrison landed, it was Sarah's turn. She walked toward her F-22, her heart pounding but her mind clear. This was her moment. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed had led to this. The F-22 was a beautiful machine, sleek and deadly. As Sarah climbed into the cockpit, she felt the power of the aircraft around her. This wasn't just a plane, it was a weapon of war, the pinnacle of human engineering. Control tower, this is Raptor 2 requesting permission for takeoff, she radioed. Raptor 2, you are cleared for takeoff. Show them what you've got. Sarah smiled inside her helmet. Copy that, Control. Here we go. The F-22 shot down the runway like a bullet. Sarah pulled back on the stick, and the aircraft leaped into the sky with incredible force. The acceleration pressed her back into her seat as the ground fell away beneath her. What happened next was pure poetry in motion. Sarah didn't just fly the F-22, she danced with it. She performed maneuvers that pushed the aircraft to its limits, moves that required perfect timing and absolute precision. She flew inverted at 500 feet, pulled vertical climbs that seemed to defy gravity, and executed rolls so tight and controlled that they left trails of vapor in the sky. The crowd was on its feet, cheering and shouting. Even the military officials were amazed. Sarah was flying better than pilots with decades of experience. But the best was yet to come. As Sarah began her final approach, she spotted Harrison standing near the runway, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. She had humiliated him in front of thousands of people, proven that she was the better pilot. Sarah keyed her radio to the frequency used by the air show announcers. Her voice was broadcast to the entire crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sarah Martinez. 5 years ago, I was kicked out of pilot training at this very base. I was told I didn't have what it takes to be a fighter pilot. I was told I didn't belong here. The crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. Today, I want to thank the person who kicked me out. Without that rejection, I never would have worked as hard as I did. I never would have become the pilot I am today. Sarah brought the F-22 in for a perfect landing, touching down so smoothly that the crowd erupted in applause. As she taxied back to the hangar, Sarah could see Harrison standing alone, his career in ruins. The military officials were already talking among themselves, clearly impressed by what they had witnessed. Sarah climbed out of the cockpit to thunderous applause. General Wong was waiting for her with a broad smile. Outstanding work, Captain Martinez. I think we need to have a conversation about your future with the Air Force. Sarah looked across the tarmac at Harrison, who was walking away with slumped shoulders. She felt no satisfaction in his defeat, only relief that justice had finally been served. I'd like that very much, General, Sarah said. As the sun set over the base, Sarah Martinez stood beside her F-22, surrounded by admirers and well-wishers. She had proven that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle, that dreams deferred were not dreams denied. 5 years ago, she had been a simple woman with big dreams. Today, she was a fighter pilot, ready to soar higher than she had ever imagined possible. The sky was no longer the limit, it was her home. 3 months later, Sarah received her permanent assignment to an elite fighter squadron. Harrison, meanwhile, had been quietly transferred to a desk job after an investigation into his conduct at the training base. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't Harrison's downfall. It was the knowledge that she had never given up on herself, even when everyone else had. As she prepared for her first combat mission, Sarah thought back to that day 5 years ago when she had been kicked out of pilot training. The rejection that had seemed like the end of her dreams had actually been the beginning of her greatest triumph. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply proving that you were right all along. And Sarah Martinez had proven it in the most spectacular way possible, by conquering the skies that had once been denied to her.